Welcome to How to Sell More. Today, we are sharing a very special bonus episode of a conversation that I had with Rand Fishkin. Now, Rand is the founder and former CEO of the SaaS software company Moz. Over 7 years as CEO, he grew the company to 130 plus employees, $30 million in revenue. He went through 2 rounds of funding, VC-backed funding, and he led 3 acquisitions, and he went through a rebrand. And he's also, after all of this experience, he wrote a book called Lost and Founder, a painfully honest field guide to the startup world, where in this book, he really broke down a lot of the myths and a lot of the kind of BS that exists that comes out of the kind of bi-coastal Silicon Valley, VC-backed, grow at all costs type approach to business. And in this book, Lost and Founder, there are so many amazing lessons. And I had a little bit of extra time with him, and so I wanted to dig into some of the lessons that he shared, the mistakes that he made in growing his company, because I think it's something we can all learn from. So a bit of a different episode, a bonus conversation I had with Rand Fishkin. If this is your first time listening to How to Sell More, this isn't typically how we approach it, so be sure to check out a bunch of different episodes, but I'm sure you're going to love this deep dive that I have, picking the brain of a man who took a company from 0 to 30 plus million as CEO, made a bunch of mistakes along the way. So with that, I'm Mark Drager. Let's get into it. So Rand, while I have you, and we just finished recording the main episode, but I wanted a bonus episode because your book, Lost and Founder, bonus. Your book, Lost and Founder, you are so open and honest about the struggles that entrepreneurs faced as they're scaling VC-backed, especially SaaS companies. When I read this book 2 years ago, it was at a point in my business where I realized that you were actually sharing the lessons that I had experienced, but didn't realize that they were lessons I should learn. And that's that sometimes more isn't more. When you start a niche company, especially if it's service-based, but you start a niche company and you're good at one thing and you keep the main thing, but then you want to grow and you're like, let's do a second thing. Let's do a third thing. Let's do a fourth thing. Let's move into new audiences. Let's grow. And then suddenly the main thing that you had isn't even good anymore. You experienced that at Moz, if I'm correct. And can you share about your experience and really why we should stay focused, stay niche, maybe not just expand for growth's sake?
Yeah. So my fundamental belief, Mark, is that this problem of always wanting more and needing to grow at all costs, especially at very high rates of growth, to be able to raise your next round of funding or to be able to pay your team and make payroll because you're out over your skis and you don't have a profitable thing, but you have a growth minded thing. I think that is why the rate of startup survival is dramatically lower than restaurant survival rate in the United States. So I did some research for the book, right?
Almost all restaurants fail though. So that's crazy.
Yeah. That's why I really like using restaurants as the example, because they're this business model that everyone's like, oh my God, never invest in a restaurant, right? They never survive. Let me tell you what, friends, the 5-year survival rate for restaurants in the US, overall average, I think this is like 2015 to 2020 was a little over 45%. It was like 47% or something like that. The survival rate for a startup that successfully raised venture was just under 15%. The rate of survival for companies that attempted to raise venture but did not, I couldn't calculate because most of those people don't even register with the Small Business Administration. But my small scale survey suggests it's that rate of survival is less than 1 in 200, right? That'll be around 5 years later, which is no surprise, right? If you are building a business and you're trying to raise venture capital and you are unsuccessful, which almost everyone who tries to raise is unsuccessful. And the crazy part is almost everyone who tries to raise is unsuccessful. Almost everyone who raises is unsuccessful. If you go and look at the model of venture-backed businesses, it's essentially that in order to have a statistically significant average that beats the market rate of return, you have to invest in 500 companies. And in that 500, less than 40 will survive to an exit that's meaningful. And of those 40, only 4 will provide you the 10x return that you're aiming for. Usually it's 1 or 2 that will make the whole fund because they have like a 500x return, right?
One of the greatest books that I've read this year is a book called Small Giants. because
Yes.
it's about 15 years old. Yeah,
Bo
Burnham?
Burnham.
Bo Burnham, Small Giants, great book.
Burlingham.
Burlingham, and his it's about 15 years old, but his assessment is that most of
For those of you listening, I just ran to my bookshelf and held up the book. I knew what color it is. I have a color-coded bookshelf. I would like credit for this.
I organize my bookshelf based on impact. So I have a special shelf where the highest impact books live. Your book is actually there, along with mindset and a few other things. But his assessment is that almost all of our thinking as business people and entrepreneurs either come from large publicly traded companies or from VC-backed startups. And his approach or his assessment is like, hey, there's tons of companies that are flying under the radar. And so if you are listening to this and you're like, well, that's interesting, Rand, but one, I'm not SaaS, or I'm not tech-based, or I'm not VC-based, or I'm not bicoastal, or what have you, the feeling of being behind, the feeling of needing constant growth, the feeling of wanting to throw money at the problems as some kind of solution does permeate into our thinking, simply because we're learning, and our whole culture, our whole entrepreneur culture and teaching and training is shaped by these, Harvard Business Review things on publicly traded companies or on these tech VC-backed startups. But your lesson when you were building Moz, I mean, whether you're VC-backed or not, what I want to get to is whatever it was, 2010, 11, 12, or whenever that was, where you started to move from your main product to introduce additional products, and what happened and what did you learn through that?
Like a lot of companies, VC-backed or not, we were desperate for growth, right? We wanted to find more growth. And we believed that our core market was not going to be big enough by itself. We served SEO professionals, which, in retrospect, obviously that market can produce several billion-dollar companies, SEMrush and Ahrefs being the two most obvious ones, but there's several others too. And we just didn't have confidence. We didn't believe that our market, that our audience was big enough. And I could not convince my board of directors or my executive team of that, especially after I stepped down as CEO and sort of developed this reputation of like, well, that's the founder who you shouldn't listen to. That experience actually tanked the company's growth, took Moz from, in 2013, several third parties did like large scale surveys of like the SEO and search marketing field. And they said, who do you use for SEO software? And Moz was number one by a wide margin from like 2010 to 20, I think even 14, we were still there. But by 2018, Moz was like number 4 or 5. And it was because the company fundamentally didn't believe in its core market, didn't believe that the SEO market could grow big enough, and so pursued all of these other paths, took its eye off the ball just at the time when competitors were building products that were as good and eventually better than Moz's own. And so even though, Moz sort of dominated in terms of content marketing, dominated in terms of community, in terms of brand recognition, even affinity, right? A lot of people would have said, even in 2015, as they were switching to Moz's competitors, I heard this from so many of our customers, I love you guys. I wish I could, if you did these things, if you were like this company, I would stick with you. I'd much rather give you these dollars. Shit, what a heartbreaking lesson to learn. So that is not the only thing that I learned from that experience, because when I wrote the book, I went out and talked, Mark, to a bunch of other entrepreneurs, right? Folks like yourself at agencies. I talked to a lot of folks in sort of creator world. I talked to plenty of folks who ran more like software types of businesses as well. And I heard that our experience was not unique, that essentially folks who looked for growth by trying to approach new audiences rather than first making sure that their core audience was beautifully served and that they continued to invest in them until they really reached that saturation and maturity point, and then started small with one new audience and one new product or feature that helped that new audience and expanded out that way. Those are the folks who had success, and the ones who tried to multitask simultaneously just failed. I would urge folks, focus is a superpower. I think that might be the title of the chapter. But focus really is a superpower. By concentrating on doing that one thing well, building that loop, that continuous loop of we learn what our customers want more of, we learn what they don't like, we continually refine and improve the product, we message those refinements and improvements to customers, we make sure they're adopting them, and then we go market that to more customers who are like the customers who already bought in the places where they pay attention. That process for growth and for delighting audiences and customers is so powerful. And I just don't think it's possible to do that while serving multiple masters at the same time.
But on top of that, what also happened as you moved from one product to another is, and this was my error. So up until 2016, I'd spent 10 years building a video focused agency. Now, when I started my agency in 2006, corporate video production was what it was called back then. It was before YouTube. Like, it was a very different world. So I had, I guess, the luxury of entering a market that was pretty old and then riding the social media wave and riding broadband and riding all kinds of things. But by 2016, I found that our value prop was commoditizing. And so I thought, well, we're moving up market. So the answer is just more services, more areas of focus. So I pushed us to becoming a full service digital agency, not quite realizing how hard it is to be an expert at every software, every CRM, every email communication channel versus like everything.
And did you find that for a decade after you tried to make this change, everybody still thought of you as, oh, video, let's go to Mark?
Surprisingly, yeah, like our video revenue almost doubled because people were so this was the interesting thing. People loved all the conversations about everything else, and it actually increased our perceived value because we could speak to all these other things. We could not just speak to production and creative and strategy, but we could speak to distribution, and we understood how the platforms worked, and it made us better at our core competency. But at what distraction and what cost? And it cannibalized our market. It moved us into much lower margin businesses that did have monthly recurring revenue, which is great. But there's a whole bunch of reasons I did it. But what you hit on with Moz especially is they're like, oh, I didn't really quite realize that the shared services would be stretched across all these different areas. Or that accounting or legal or that we can't negotiate for this big huge move and also balance these other big huge moves. And I didn't realize, it sounds like you may not have realized, but the way I look at it now is every business activity or initiative is almost like its own little company. We've launched the How to Sell More podcast, and that has taken so much of our focus at our agency sales loop that it's like the thought of launching a second or third podcast or launching this or like this podcast has its own team, its own business, its own focus, its own KPIs. And so I think too many business owners or marketers especially, because they want to touch everything and do everything. I don't know what the question I have for you, but quite honestly is other than I learned so much from you.
It's not just the distraction, right? Folks think like, well, I can manage the distraction by hiring another team to do this stuff, right? We hired a team to do Moz Local. We hired a team to do Moz Content. We hired a team to do Moz Social. And we thought, well, surely they can just kind of operate independently. And this was not the case. Every single new team required new support, required new complexity, required reporting, required management layers, right? We had to build a new management layer as opposed to, okay, well, the CEO is the product leader essentially for the whole company to, nope, now we have product leaders across each of the divisions. Okay, but should product leaders also be the manager of each department? And you just get tons of complexity. That complexity in organizational design creates complexity in being able to accomplish tasks because of communication, because of reporting, because of competition, internal competition between teams, who's doing which better. I want that engineer. No, you can't have him. I need him. All that stuff. Why is HR helping that team recruit? I need HR's help to recruit. Well, the reason I couldn't hit my KPIs for my team is because HR didn't help me recruit my person. Infighting, lack of trust, all that.
This affected sales though, right?
Yeah. And this is the other thing that happens. So SparkToro right now has a call to action on its website. This is related, I promise, stick with me. Has a call to action on its website for our annual conference, right? Our event. It's an online event. It's called Spark Together. Amanda runs it. It's outstanding. I love it to pieces. It's coming up in November. And so it has a little banner across the top of the website. whenever we put that call to action up of like, go check out Spark Together, people do. Like some people will click on that thing if they've heard about it, they'll check it out, whatever, which brings down the conversion rate of visitors to new signups on regular SparkToro. And every single new thing you add to the website does exactly that. So when you went to Moz's website and you saw Moz Social, Moz Content, Moz Local, Moz for Enterprise, Classic Moz, the SEO thing that many people used and were used to, you were sort of like, I wonder which one is for me. Do I need to check out all 4 of these? Ooh, what's MozCon? Oh, apparently that's their conference. I should check that out too. Well, they have an email list. I should check out that.
But people would argue that landing pages and targeted traffic would be the answer to that.
Yeah, people would argue, and they would find that it does not work the way you think it does. It's not just 1 + 1. It will always be divisive. It will always draw attention away, right? When Expedia wanted to create a corporate travel program, they launched a new website. They put the team in a different building. They had to do all their own hiring. They had their own HR. They were not allowed to have a single link on Expedia's website, right? Because it was like, you don't get to distract and detract from the attention and awareness that we're building. So we're going to keep you entirely separate. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. It's extremely hard. You don't see any ads for AWS on Amazon, not a one.
No.
Right? There's different audience, different customer, different thing you're serving them with, all that kind of thing. I haven't seen a Blue Origin ad for send your shit to space in our rocket on there either.
So is the answer simply different brands, different P&Ls, different teams? Oh, guess what? They're different companies. I mean, at that point.
Here's how I feel. I think, very frankly, it is above my pay grade and expertise. So if you are a company that's scaling from $50 to $100 million in revenue, and you get to north of that, and you could reasonably IPO with your one product and your that kind of thing, fantastic. And then you want the complexity of multiple products, you go for it. I think that'll be great. I talked to Chris Savage recently, right, which is a company that's doing very well with Wistia. They're in the video space. I'm sure you're very familiar with them. We use them at Moz for Whiteboard Friday. We use them at SparkToro for all my videos. Great company, fantastic. My co-founder, Casey, worked there for a little bit. Wistia tried to launch this, what was it called? Soapbox. They found that Soapbox was quite successful, and also that it distracted and detracted so much from Wistia itself and made things so complex that they were like, God damn it. 2 products is so hard. Why is 2 products so hard? We're even serving the same people with a really similar thing. But thing 1 is distracting from thing 2. This is just the way it is. I mean, I kind of feel like this is why, you know how people talk about you can have 2 or 3 things in your life, but not 4 or 5, right? You can have kids and a marriage and a business, or you can have marriage and a business and you can be very responsible about working out, or you can have a hobby and a marriage and no kids and, a side hustle, or, whatever it is. They always talk about those. You can probably manage to do 3, and anything more than that, if you really want to focus on it, that thing will sit by the wayside. This is why a lot of therapists talk about how divorce happens when those 3 things turn into 4, right? Or the intensity of the process, because the marriage is often the thing that falls to the side. Frankly, I think the same thing is true in organizations.
And so if you had to do it again, which I know you're doing now, what's the answer? Just be comfortable with growth takes as long as it takes. Don't try to force it too much and just keep the main thing.
I really think that doing better at the one thing, or deciding, if you really decide, if you're like, gosh, this one thing is not right, get rid of the one thing, go to the other thing. One of the reasons we chose the name SparkToro is literally because it had no association with anything. So if at some point we were like, you know what? We thought this audience research thing was going to be great and but it didn't work well. I mean, obviously now, the brand is established, but in those first couple of years, we were doing a ton of R&D and customer interviews and research and trying to figure out whether this thing was going to take off. I think I even showed you the product at one point, right? In those early days, Mark. And what I would say is we named it this thing that had no other association, so that if we wanted to change to another business entirely, we could. And it's fundamentally about getting the design of the business dialed in, finding that right customer that can grow to a size that you're comfortable with, a market that's sized to your appetite for risk and reward. And then investing in that thing until you sort of have the success rather than, well, we're doing a little bit with this. Let's do a little bit with that. Let's try another thing here. It's all going to sit under the same company umbrella. We're going to try and run it all as one org. I think I don't think no one's done it, but I think so few people have done it that you should take it as a cautionary tale and try to avoid that.
Such good advice. So now you mentioned Spark Together a little bit earlier. Can you just quickly, because I know you got to go, but can you just quickly tell us about this? Because I came to last year's event. We are a sponsor of this year's event. I am super, super excited about your community.
We love that support, Mark, right? Like it's extremely meaningful to all three of us. But so Spark Together is very, very unique. It is not recorded, and it is intentionally not recorded so that the presenters can be vulnerable and transparent to a small audience of a few hundred people who join this event and are online. And that's the only time you'll ever hear that story. They will never tell it on another stage. They don't tweet about it. They haven't written about it. There's no books about it. You will get some, last year's stories, there were some absolutely wild ones, right? Like, the founder, CEO of Glowforge telling some really painful stories from the start of the pandemic and how that affected their business and what they did to try and turn that around. And folks, there was a presenter from an agency. I won't reveal details, but who talked about essentially a campaign that completely failed, and why it bombed. It was a diagnosis of why a campaign bombed. You will never see a talk like that anywhere else. And this year's is no different, right? We're going to see some failed launches. We're going to have some very vulnerable experiences. Folks talking about how they came around to prioritizing their personal happiness over the raw size and success of their business. Personally, I find those stories so much more valuable than let me give you these 10 tips for how to optimize your PPC campaign. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't think that belongs personally on an event stage. For me, Mark, I want to read that in a blog post, right? I want to have that information so digestible. I can go through, I can do the tips and tactics. When you get up on that stage, I want to hear a story I hear anywhere else. That's real. That's the stuff that sticks with me. I find that is not just interesting and sort of, attention worthy, but it also makes the lessons learned stick with me when I hear it in that story format. So that's what Spark Together is all about. And I think it's November 15th, if I'm not mistaken. You can watch it online. It's US time, but if you're in other regions, it's fairly friendly to a lot of time zones. And we keep it about 5-6 hours. So.
Hey there, it's Mark again. I want to thank Rand for joining me. I want to thank you for listening. I love being able to have conversations like this because I just want to be able to pick the brains of the most amazing people who have experiences that I can learn from, that you can learn from. And that's why we're all here, right? And so if you want to learn more about SparkToro, just be sure to head over to SparkToro.com. If you want to follow Rand and see all of his different adventures in life, what he's doing, he's a pretty cool guy, head over to IG. You can follow him at RandDRuder. If you want to follow us while you're over there, be sure to check us out at Sales Loop Brand. And one last thing, I would highly recommend that if you're an entrepreneur, if you have struggled through the growth and scale of your business, pick up a copy of Lost and Founder. It's a great listen on Audible. Rand reads it himself. It is, the subline is a painfully honest field guide to the startup world. It is a painfully honest field guide. It's really all there. But within it is so much optimism, so much hope, so many lessons for what we can do if we want to grow our businesses. And so I would highly recommend picking up a copy of that book. If you like these types of bonus conversations, just drop us a DM. Head over to Sales Loop Brand on IG. Drop us a DM and say, I want to hear more of these kind of conversations. This is a bit of an experiment, a bit of a test. I'm not sure if we're going to keep doing these behind the scenes type of bonus episodes, but I wanted to share this with you. So I really appreciate you listening in. If you made it this far, maybe you want to consider subscribing. That would mean the world to us. If you can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, that would also help out our little podcast as well. With that, I'm Mark Drager. Have yourself an awesome day, and we will catch you in the next episode.